Good afternoon. I would like to start with a statistic. There are 1.6 million disabled people in London. Now, when I say disabled people, many people immediately think of a wheelchair user. Someone like me, but it's much broader than that. I'm talking about wheelchair users, I'm talking about deaf people, blind and partially sighted people, neurodivergent people, people with chronic illnesses, people with learning difficulties, people with mental health conditions, people with conditions that are visible and conditions that are invisible. Disability exists in every community, every workplace and every family. And for many of us, disability is only one illness, one accident, or simply enough birthdays away. But I want to challenge something else. People often think disability is something that exists within an individual. I don't. My impairment is that I use a wheelchair. I have multiple sclerosis that cannot be changed, but society can. My disability is created by the barriers around me. If my local underground station is not step-free, I become more disabled. If my housing isn't accessible, I become more disabled. If I can't get the support I need, I become more disabled. But when those barriers are removed, I become less disabled. My impairment hasn't changed, society has. And that matters because barriers are not acts of nature, they are political choices. And political choices can be changed. Which leads me on to housing. What is accessible housing? The answer is actually very simple. Accessible housing is housing that works. Housing that people can get into, move around in, use safely, and continue living in as their needs change. That might mean step-free access, a lift that works, enough space to move around, good lighting, bathrooms that can be changed, features that allow people to live independently. And here's the important point. Who here thinks that accessible housing is mainly for disabled people? Please put your hands up. Okay, thank you for honesty, I appreciate that. Now put your hands up if you've ever pushed a buggy, broken a leg, had a bad knee, or like Abdul, who is currently using a crutch, had a temporary injury, had an older relative visit, carried heavy shopping upstairs, helped someone move house, or worried about getting older. Please put your hands up if that's the case. Brilliant. That's everyone then. Accessible housing is simply good housing. Yet despite that, London's target is just 10% of new homes to be built wheelchair accessible or adaptable. And even that target is not being met. Let's think about that for a second. Imagine you can only access 10% of London. Imagine if 90% of homes were effectively telling you that you were not expected, not considered, and not welcome. It would be easy for me to sit here and call for a higher target, and perhaps one day I will, but the target right now is not being met. Now let's talk about health. We often think of health as something that starts in a GP surgery or in A&E. But health starts at home. If transport, job opportunities, social interaction are the vital organs, a home is the heart of someone's society. And if the heart fails, everything else does. If you are lonely because you cannot leave your home, your health suffers. If your housing increases your risk of falls, your health suffers. If your home causes stress and anxiety, your health suffers. If your housing strips away your independence, your health suffers. Housing and health are inseparable. And I was reminded of that very recently. Last week, I was trapped on the 6th floor of my building because both lifts broke down. I could not leave my flat. Friends gathered outside. Family came to help. The London Fire Brigade came and carried me downstairs. I'm hugely grateful to everyone who supported me. But I keep coming back to the same question. Why should a wheelchair user in 2026 need the fire brigade simply to leave their house, their home? That isn't independence, that isn't dignity, that isn't accessibility. And if there had been a fire, it raises an even more serious question. Because a home isn't truly accessible if there isn't a safe way out. Accessibility and safety are part of the same conversation. And that's why on the 14th of June, this month, next week, I will be joining the Grenfell silent walk before speaking at the rally afterwards. It is a privilege to have been asked, but I wish the reason for the event didn't exist. It's even a greater privilege to join the bereaved families, survivors and campaigners who have spent years fighting for change. One of the clearest recommendations from phase 1 of the Grenfell inquiry was the introduction of personal emergency evacuation plans, PEEPs. Not watered down alternatives, not partial solutions, but proper evacuation plans to ensure disabled people can escape safely in an emergency. Because the right to live safely in your home should never depend on luck. Grenfell taught us the consequences of ignoring disabled people's voices. We owe it to those who lost their lives to do better. Which brings me on to what I believe is one of the biggest problems in public policy, the false economy. We are surrounded by false economies. We buy cheaper equipment that breaks down. We delay adaptations into a crisis. We build housing that isn't accessible. We cut support and then act surprised when people need help later. We save pounds today and spend thousands tomorrow. That's not efficiency, that's a false economy. I recently crowdfunded and spent a substantial amount of money on a high quality wheelchair. Was it expensive? Absolutely. But what's more expensive? Repeated breakdowns, engineer call-outs, missed appointments, worsening health, and a greater reliance on services. I understand that an engineer visit can cost around £500 every time someone has to come out. Multiply that across years of breakdowns. Then add the cost to the NHS, the cost to social care, the cost and loss of independence. Suddenly, the cheaper option doesn't sound cheaper at all. The same is true in housing. When we fail to build accessible housing, we pay later. Through hospital appointments, through delayed discharges, through increased social care needs, through mental health pressures, through emergency interventions, through loneliness and a loss of independence. We pay again and again and again. Accessible housing is not a cost, it's actually an investment. An investment in communities. So I would like to leave you with one thought. Whether we're talking about housing, transport, equipment, or support services, the principle is exactly the same. Invest early. remove barriers, support independence and dignity, improve health, and save money in the long run. The question isn't whether we can afford to make these choices. The question is if we can afford to not make these choices. Thank you for listening.